British, September 18, 1945. Mount Kazehara, Mindanao Island, Philippines. Lieutenant Colonel Akira Hayakawa's weathered hands shook as he sealed the final dispatch in his regimental war chest, knowing these words would serve as his epitaph. For 134 days, his garrison had transformed an abandoned copper mine into an impregnable fortress, surviving on fungus and filtered rainwater while American forces hurled everything short of atomic weapons at their position. What Hayakawa couldn't know was that 400 meters below in the valley, Marine Corps specialists were preparing to unleash Operation Inferno, a systematic application of thermal weapons so devastating that it would end not just his regiment's resistance, but fundamentally alter how military strategists approached fortified positions forever. The dragon's breath was coming for Mount Kazehara, and when the flames finally died, only silence would remain. September 18, 1945. Mount Kazehara, Mindanao Island, Philippines. The copper mine shaft descended into darkness like a throat swallowing light. Lieutenant Colonel Akira Hayakawa of the Imperial Japanese Army's 77th Mountain Defense Regiment pressed his back against the cool volcanic rock, listening to the irregular drip of water echoing through passages that had become both sanctuary and tomb for his remaining men. 47 meters above his head, through a carefully concealed observation port carved from the mine's original ventilation system, the Philippine jungle sprawled in every direction. Dense mahogany canopy blocked most sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight that had hidden his positions from American reconnaissance aircraft for over 4 months. But today, something felt different. Through his improvised periscope, constructed from a dental mirror salvaged from the regimental medical kit and fragments of a shattered rifle scope, Hayakawa could observe the enemy positions that had surrounded Mount Kazehara since May 7th. The Americans had established a loose cordon approximately 800 meters from the base of his mountain, just beyond effective rifle range, but close enough to prevent any escape attempt. The numbers that filled his daily situation reports defied every principle of military logic he had learned at the Imperial War College. His original garrison of 1,247 officers and men had been reduced to 203 skeletal survivors. They possessed fewer than 400 rounds of rifle ammunition, no artillery shells, no medical supplies beyond iodine and bandages, and hadn't received a supply drop or radio contact with division headquarters in 73 days. Their food situation bordered on the catastrophic. The last of their rice had been consumed on July 15th. Since then, they had survived on a diet that would have been unthinkable to peacetime soldiers: tree bark boiled into a bitter soup, fern roots ground into paste, insects when they could be caught, and an occasional monkey or wild pig that wandered too close to their improvised snares. 2 men had died from poisonous plants. 3 others had succumbed to dysentery when their water purification tablets ran out. Yet somehow, impossibly, they continued to hold Mount Kazehara. What sustained them wasn't hope of rescue or dreams of victory, but something more fundamental: the knowledge that surrender meant dishonor not just for themselves, but for their families back in Japan. Better to die as soldiers than live as prisoners. This philosophy, drilled into them since basic training, had transformed 203 starving men into an immovable obstacle that had frustrated American military planners for months. But Hayakawa's trained eye detected changes in the enemy dispositions that troubled him. Through his observations over the past week, he had noticed new personnel arriving in the American camps. Not regular infantry replacements, but specialists wearing different insignia and carrying equipment he didn't recognize. Large cylindrical objects were being unloaded from transport trucks under heavy canvas coverings. Teams of what appeared to be engineers were conducting surveys of the mountain's approaches, taking measurements and consulting instruments that bore no resemblance to standard military gear. Most disturbing was the pattern of American withdrawal. For 3 days, enemy forces had been pulling back from their forward positions, establishing new defensive lines nearly a full kilometer from Mount Kazehara's base. This made no tactical sense. If they were preparing for another frontal assault, they should be moving closer, not farther away. The mountain felt like a trap waiting to be sprung, and Hayakawa had the growing certainty that he and his men were the prey. The anomalous behavior had been building gradually, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. Each incident seemed insignificant in isolation, but together they formed a pattern that defied conventional military logic. August 28, 1945, 06:30 hours. Sergeant Major Kenji Matsumoto, manning the northern observation post designated Crow's Nest, filed the first report of unusual enemy activity in Grid Square 7 Delta. Strange vehicles approaching the American camp, sir. Not their usual trucks or jeeps. These are different.
The vehicles in question were 6-wheeled transport trucks pulling trailers loaded with cylindrical objects approximately 2 meters in length and half a meter in diameter. Teams of American personnel unloaded these mysterious containers with unusual care, handling them like delicate scientific instruments rather than military equipment. Most puzzling was the arrival of specialists wearing uniforms Matsumoto had never seen. Not the familiar olive drab of American infantry, but gray-green fatigues with distinctive shoulder patches. September 2, 1945, 1400 hours. The mystery deepened when Private First Class Taro Ishikawa, a former mining engineer from Hokkaido who had joined the army after his copper extraction company was conscripted for war production, noticed that American activity had shifted from routine patrol patterns to what appeared to be systematic geological surveying. "They're studying the mountain itself, Colonel," Ishikawa reported during the afternoon briefing in the main command bunker, a natural cave system enlarged with explosives and reinforced with timber salvaged from the mine's original support structures. Teams of men with instruments, taking measurements, making charts. They're not planning another infantry assault. Through careful observation over several days, Ishikawa had documented American teams using equipment that bore no resemblance to standard military engineering tools. They carried devices that measured distances with precision, instruments that appeared to analyze rock composition, and mapping equipment far more sophisticated than anything required for conventional warfare. Most significantly, they seemed particularly interested in the mine's original entrance and ventilation shafts, information that should have been irrelevant for surface assault planning. September 8, 1945, 2130 hours. Radio intercepts provided the next piece of the puzzle. Corporal Masato Tanaka, formerly an English literature professor at Waseda University before his conscription, had been monitoring American communications using a makeshift radio receiver constructed from salvaged mining equipment and components scavenged from destroyed Japanese military radios. The intercepted transmissions contained coded references that chilled Tanaka when he finally decoded them. Dragon breath units in position. Thermal cleansing protocols approved. Fuel mixture testing completed. Ignition systems operational. "The terminology means nothing to me militarily," Tanaka reported to Hayakawa in the flickering candlelight of the command bunker. "But the urgency in their communications suggests something significant is being prepared. References to thermal operations appear in multiple transmissions." September 12, 1945, 0800 hours. The pattern escalated when Sergeant Koji Nakamura, observing from the southern approach designated Eagle's Perch, reported systematic changes in American defensive positions that defied standard tactical doctrine. "They're withdrawing, sir. All forward positions are being abandoned," Nakamura transmitted through the communication wire system. "But they're not retreating. They're repositioning." Over the course of 3 days, American forces had methodically pulled back from positions they had held for months, establishing new defensive lines at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters from Mount Kazehara's base. Artillery pieces were being relocated to more distant firing positions. Infantry companies were digging new defensive works nearly a full kilometer from their previous positions. Most puzzling was the establishment of what appeared to be observation posts equipped with sophisticated optical equipment, all positioned to provide clear sight lines to Mount Kazehara while maintaining safe distances that exceeded the range of any weapons the Japanese garrison might possess. September 15, 1945, 1900 hours. The mystery reached its most ominous phase when all American activity suddenly ceased. For 72 hours, the enemy forces that had maintained constant pressure on Mount Kazehara simply disappeared from view. No patrol activity, no reconnaissance flights, no artillery harassment, no radio transmissions that Tanaka could intercept. The jungle around Mount Kazehara became eerily quiet, as if the Americans had simply vanished. But they hadn't vanished. Through his observation post, Hayakawa could see smoke from their cooking fires in the distant camps. Supply vehicles continued arriving and departing on the main access road. The Americans were still there, but they had withdrawn into a defensive posture that suggested they were preparing for something that required significant safety margins. The silence was more unnerving than months of bombardment had been. On the evening of September 17th, as Hayakawa made his final entries in the regimental war diary, he wrote words that would prove prophetic. "The enemy has stopped trying to take our position by conventional means. Whatever they are planning, it is something we have never faced. May the Emperor forgive us for what we could not foresee." September 19th, 1945, 05:47 hours, Mount Kazehara. The answer arrived with the dawn, carried by warriors who seemed to emerge from the depths of hell itself. Lieutenant Colonel Hayakawa was reviewing the morning situation reports in the main command bunker when the screaming began. Not the familiar sounds of combat, rifle fire, artillery explosions, or battle cries, but something far more primal and terrifying. Human voices raised in absolute terror, echoing through the mineshaft system like the wails of souls in torment.
British. The sound was coming from Level 3, the middle tier of defensive positions where Sergeant Matsumoto's section had been manning the northern approaches. Through the mine's communication system came fragmented, panic-filled transmissions. "Fire! Liquid fire! They're burning everything! The air is gone! The air is gone!" Hayakawa scrambled up the narrow shaft that led to his primary observation post, a carefully concealed position that provided panoramic views of the mountain's northern face. What he saw through his improvised periscope defied every expectation of warfare he had developed in 23 years of military service. American soldiers were advancing up Mount Kazehara's slopes in coordinated teams, each man carrying equipment that appeared to belong in a science fiction nightmare rather than on a battlefield. Strapped to their backs were metallic cylindrical tanks connected by hoses to nozzle-like devices held in their hands. From these nozzles erupted streams of liquid fire that adhered to everything they touched: trees, rocks, camouflaged bunkers, and human beings. The flamethrower operators moved with deliberate precision, protected by infantry squads and supported by engineers who carried explosive charges and specialized equipment. They weren't conducting a conventional assault. They were systematically sterilizing the mountain. Bamboo fortifications that had withstood 4 months of artillery bombardment burst into inferno within seconds of contact with the liquid fire. Camouflage nets that had concealed Japanese positions since May became funeral shrouds of flame. Most horrifically, the elaborate defensive works that Hayakawa's engineers had spent months constructing, log bunkers, stone sangars, concealed rifle pits, became death traps as the liquid fire poured into every opening and clung to every surface. But the true horror wasn't the flames themselves, it was what happened to the air.
In the confined spaces of the mineshaft system, the flamethrowers didn't just burn, they consumed oxygen. The liquid fire, which Hayakawa had no way of knowing was napalm-thickened fuel designed specifically for this purpose, burned to temperatures exceeding 1800 degrees Fahrenheit while simultaneously depleting the atmosphere of breathable air. Men who escaped the direct flames found themselves suffocating in passages that had become furnaces. Others, driven from burning positions by the consuming fire, emerged from mine shafts only to face coordinated small arms fire from American infantry positioned at every known exit point. Through his observation port, Hayakawa watched in horror as defensive positions that had held for 134 days were abandoned in minutes. The northern approach, deemed impregnable by his engineers, was cleared in less than 30 minutes. The eastern positions, reinforced with concrete and steel salvaged from the original mining operation, fell in 45 minutes. The flamethrower teams advanced with methodical precision. Each operator assigned specific targets based on detailed intelligence that American forces had obviously gathered over months of observation. They knew exactly where every bunker was located, precisely which cave entrances provided access to the main tunnel system, and specifically how to apply their weapons for maximum psychological as well as physical effect. By 0630 hours, less than an hour after the assault began, Mount Kazehara's outer defensive perimeter had ceased to exist. The weapon that was systematically destroying Mount Kazehara's defenses had not been developed specifically for jungle warfare, though it had evolved into the perfect tool for exactly this type of fortified position reduction. The M2-2 portable flamethrower system represented the culmination of military engineering that traced its origins to the industrial slaughter of the Western Front during the Great War. German pioneers had first used crude flame projectors in the trenches of Verdun in 1916, discovering that fire weapons created psychological effects far beyond their actual destructive capability. French, British, and eventually American forces had developed their own versions, but the primitive technology of the era limited their effectiveness. The real breakthrough came in 1942 when Harvard University chemist Dr. Louis Fieser, working under contract with the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, developed what would become known as napalm. By combining gasoline with aluminium soaps, specifically aluminium naphthenate and aluminium palmitate, Fieser created a gel-like substance that maintained liquid fire's intensity while adhering to surfaces like glue. But it was the Pacific theater that revealed the flamethrower's true strategic potential. The island-hopping campaigns of 1943 and 1944 had presented American forces with defensive challenges unlike anything encountered in European warfare. Japanese defenders, following tactical doctrines developed by General Tadamichi Kuribayami and refined through bitter experience on islands like Tarawa and Saipan, had perfected the art of cave and tunnel defense. These positions were nearly impervious to conventional weapons. Naval bombardments that could level entire cities bounced harmlessly off coral and volcanic rock. Artillery shells that could destroy concrete fortifications had minimal effect on caves carved into solid stone. Airstrikes, however massive, could not penetrate underground defensive networks that extended hundreds of meters into island interiors. Infantry assaults against such positions resulted in casualty rates that threatened the entire Pacific campaign's viability. At Iwo Jima, American forces had suffered 26,000 casualties, capturing an island defended by 18,000 Japanese troops entrenched in cave systems. At Okinawa, the casualty ratio had been even worse. The flamethrower changed the entire tactical equation. Marine Corps units first employed portable flame weapons systematically during the Guadalcanal campaign in 1943, when standard infantry weapons proved inadequate against Japanese bunker complexes built into the island's mountainous terrain. The results were immediate and dramatic. Positions that had resisted weeks of conventional attack fell to flamethrower teams in hours. By 1944, every Marine Corps infantry regiment included specialized flame tank units and portable flamethrower teams. The weapons had proven devastatingly effective at Saipan, where Japanese defenders had constructed cave complexes that extended deep into the island's volcanic interior. Flamethrowers cleared these caves in systematic operations that reduced American casualties by an estimated 70% compared to conventional assault methods. The success led to rapid technological advancement. The Chemical Warfare Service developed improved fuel mixtures designed for specific environmental conditions. Portable flamethrowers evolved from crude devices weighing over 100 pounds to streamlined systems that trained operators could carry and employ effectively in combat. Tactical doctrines emerged that integrated flame weapons with conventional infantry, artillery, and engineer operations. But the Philippines campaign had presented new challenges that required further innovation. Unlike the relatively barren coral atolls of the Central Pacific, islands like Luzon and Mindanao offered Japanese defenders advantages that American planners had not fully anticipated. Dense tropical vegetation provided perfect concealment for defensive positions. Volcanic geology allowed for extensive underground fortifications. Monsoon weather created conditions that favored determined defenders over mechanized attackers dependent on air support and artillery. Most significantly, Japanese defenders in the Philippines had learned from the defeats at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. They had refined cave defense techniques, developed improved camouflage methods, and created tunnel systems designed specifically to defeat flamethrower attacks through improved ventilation and multiple exit routes. Mount Kazehara represented the evolution of these defensive techniques. The abandoned copper mine provided a ready-made underground fortress with natural ventilation systems, multiple access routes, and geological features that defeated conventional weapons. Japanese engineers had spent months improving these natural advantages, creating what they believed was an impregnable position. The American response required a corresponding evolution in flame warfare technology and tactics. Operation Inferno, the systematic reduction of Mount Kazehara's defenses, represented the culmination of 3 years of hard-learned lessons about the application of thermal weapons against fortified positions. The planning had begun in July 1945, when conventional assaults against the mountain had resulted in unacceptable casualty rates while achieving no measurable progress. Colonel James Mitchell, commanding the 7th Marine Specialized Flame Warfare Battalion, had been tasked with developing a solution that would eliminate the Mount Kazehara garrison without the massive casualties that conventional assault would require. His planning team included chemical warfare specialists, geological engineers, and psychological warfare experts who had studied Japanese defensive psychology extensively. The solution they developed would revolutionize siege warfare for the remainder of the war and beyond. The M2-2 portable flamethrower system that was systematically destroying Mount Kazehara's defenses represented the pinnacle of military engineering applied to the science of thermal warfare.
Each complete system consisted of 5 primary components integrated into a portable package that could be operated by a single trained soldier. The fuel tanks, 2 cylindrical containers manufactured from high-grade steel and coated with heat-resistant material, held a combined total of 4.5 gallons of napalm mixture designated Super Napalm B. This fuel combination included gasoline, benzene, and aluminum naphthenate in precisely calculated proportions that produced optimal burning characteristics for different environmental conditions. The propellant system utilized compressed nitrogen stored in a separate cylindrical tank pressurized to 375 pounds per square inch. This pressure level had been determined through extensive testing to provide optimal range and fuel distribution while maintaining operator safety margins. The nitrogen system was connected to the fuel tanks through a series of precision-engineered valves and regulators that allowed operators to control fuel flow with extraordinary accuracy. The ignition mechanism represented perhaps the most sophisticated component of the entire system. Rather than relying on primitive open-flame pilot lights that could be extinguished by wind or rain, the M2-2 employed an electrical ignition system powered by a compact battery pack. When activated, this system generated a high-voltage spark that ignited the fuel stream at the precise moment it left the projection nozzle, ensuring reliable ignition under adverse weather conditions that had plagued earlier flamethrower designs.
British flamethrower designs were primarily modified anti-tank weapons designed for igniting vehicles, with limited capacity for flame generation and distribution. The projection nozzle itself was engineered to optimize both range and fuel distribution patterns. Constructed from heat-resistant alloys and equipped with interchangeable tips, the nozzle could project napalm accurately up to 165 feet, a range that exceeded most rifle fire in jungle conditions. More importantly, the nozzle design allowed operators to vary the fuel stream from narrow, concentrated jets for precision targeting to wide dispersal patterns for area coverage. The complete system, when fully loaded with fuel and propellant, weighed 68 pounds, distributed across a backpack harness designed by paratrooper equipment specialists to maintain operator mobility while providing adequate protection for the fuel tanks. Extensive testing had determined that this weight represented the optimal balance between fuel capacity and tactical mobility. But the real innovation in the Mount Kazehara operation wasn't mechanical, it was chemical and tactical. The napalm mixture designated for Operation Inferno was a specially modified version developed specifically for cave and tunnel warfare. Standard Super Napalm B burned intensely but consumed available oxygen relatively quickly. The modified mixture, designated Super Napalm B Extended, included chemical additives that sustained combustion for up to 15 minutes while simultaneously producing carbon monoxide and other toxic gases that would penetrate deep into tunnel systems. This chemical modification had been developed through grim experimentation conducted at the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, where captured Japanese cave fortifications from Saipan had been reconstructed for testing purposes. American chemical warfare specialists had systematically tested different napalm formulations to determine optimal compositions for underground warfare applications. The tactical deployment at Mount Kazehara represented the culmination of 3 years of doctrine development for cave reduction operations. Intelligence preparation had consumed 6 weeks of intensive effort. Aerial photography specialists had identified every visible entrance to the mine system.
Ground reconnaissance teams had mapped approach routes and determined optimal positioning for support weapons. Most critically, geological engineers had studied the mountain's internal structure using techniques developed for mining operations, creating three-dimensional maps of the tunnel system that guided tactical planning. The assault force was organized into specialized thermal reduction teams, each consisting of 3 flamethrower operators supported by 2 rifle squads, an engineer demolition team, and the medical corpsmen trained specifically for burn casualties. This organization had evolved through hard experience during previous cave reduction operations, where inadequate support for flamethrower operators had resulted in high casualty rates among specialized personnel who required months of training to replace. Communication systems were critical to the operation's success. Each flamethrower operator carried a portable radio tuned to dedicated frequencies that prevented interference with conventional infantry communications. Additionally, the teams employed visual signaling systems adapted from mining safety protocols. Colored smoke generators indicated position status, while flag signals marked areas that had been cleared or required additional attention. The timing of the assault had been calculated with extraordinary precision. Operations began at 0547 hours, the exact moment when morning mist would provide concealment for the initial approach, while dawn light would allow accurate target identification. The assault sequence was choreographed to progress from north to south, systematically closing off escape routes while maintaining pressure on defenders throughout the tunnel system. Perhaps most importantly, psychological warfare considerations had been integrated into every aspect of the tactical plan. American specialists had studied Japanese military psychology extensively, determining that flame weapons created unique terror responses that could paralyze defending forces more effectively than conventional weapons. The systematic, methodical application of flamethrowers was designed to maximize psychological impact while minimizing the time defenders had to organize effective countermeasures. Environmental factors had been analyzed exhaustively. Humidity levels, wind patterns, temperature variations, and geological conditions had all been factored into fuel mixture calculations and tactical planning. Even monsoon weather patterns had been considered. Operation Inferno had been scheduled during a brief break in the rainy season when atmospheric conditions would optimize flamethrower effectiveness. The result was a military operation that represented the perfect integration of technology, tactics, intelligence, and psychological warfare applied against a target that had been studied with scientific precision. Every element of the assault had been calculated for maximum effectiveness with minimum risk to American forces. A deadly choreography that would transform Mount Kazehara into a crematorium.
British. By 0800 hours, Mount Kazehara's defensive network had collapsed like a house of cards. The flamethrower assault created a domino effect that destroyed not just positions, but the will to resist. Sergeant Major Matsumoto's northern section fell first. Liquid fire poured into the main tunnel entrance, creating a furnace that reached 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Men who had survived months of starvation died within minutes, not from burns, but from superheated air that seared their lungs. The tunnel system became a death trap as toxic gases spread through passages that had once provided safety. Private Ishikawa's engineering section attempted to seal the mine shafts with explosives, but the Americans had anticipated this. Flamethrower teams systematically targeted every known entrance while engineers used shaped charges to collapse escape routes. The mountain that had been their fortress became their tomb. Most devastating was the psychological collapse. Japanese soldiers who had faced artillery, bombing, and infantry assaults with stoic determination broke completely when confronted with liquid fire. Cultural training that emphasized honor in death became meaningless when death came through suffocation and incineration rather than glorious battle. In the main command bunker, Lieutenant Colonel Hayakawa faced an impossible choice. Military honor demanded he lead his men in a final charge, but the tunnel system was filled with poisonous smoke and superheated air. Surrender violated every principle of his training, yet staying meant watching his remaining soldiers die horribly. Corporal Tanaka, the former English professor, made the decision for him. "Sir, we must signal surrender. This is not warfare, it's execution." Using a white flag made from a torn undershirt, Tanaka emerged from a ventilation shaft, hands raised, as liquid fire consumed the mountain around him. Sergeant Nakamura, trapped in a collapsed tunnel with 6 men, spent his final moments writing farewell letters on scraps of paper, knowing they would never reach home. When American engineers found their bodies 3 days later, the letters were intact, preserved in the sealed chamber where they had suffocated. Operation Inferno achieved in 6 hours what conventional weapons couldn't accomplish in 134 days. The statistics were staggering. 203 Japanese defenders eliminated with 0 American casualties. The flamethrower teams expended only 180 gallons of napalm, less fuel than a single tank consumed in an hour of operation. The psychological impact extended far beyond Mount Kazehara. Word of the flamethrower assault spread through remaining Japanese positions across the Philippines, causing mass surrenders as defenders realized the futility of cave defense against thermal weapons. The tactics developed at Mount Kazehara became standard doctrine for cave warfare, later applied in Korea and Vietnam. The specialized equipment and techniques saved thousands of American lives by eliminating the need for costly frontal assaults against fortified positions. Mount Kazehara proved that the most effective weapons attack not just the body, but the spirit. The flamethrowers didn't just burn Japanese positions, they incinerated the entire concept of honorable resistance. In 6 hours of liquid fire, 3 years of Japanese defensive doctrine became obsolete. Lieutenant Colonel Hayakawa's final diary entry, recovered from the command bunker, captured the transformation. "We prepared to die as warriors, but the Americans gave us no chance for honor. They turned our fortress into hell itself. And hell has no heroes, only victims."